Welcome to Mr. Doom's channel for horror stories.
Go away. Tonight, we descend into a chilling silence that has echoed for nearly a century. We will not speak of monsters from fiction, but of a real American family, the Sodders, and the 5 children who vanished into smoke and shadow on a long-ago Christmas Eve. We will follow the whispers that haunted their parents, George and Ginny, for a lifetime. Whispers of strange cars, a mysterious photograph, and the chilling possibility that the fire was not an end, but a beginning. This is a story of a void that was never filled, a scream that never faded. Before the darkness finds us, make sure you've sealed the exits by hitting that subscribe button and let the algorithm know you're one of us with a quick like. It might not save you from the story's end, but at least you won't face it alone. Now, let the tale begin. The story of the Sodder family is not a ghost story, though ghosts are most certainly present. They do not rattle chains or slam doors in the dead of night. Instead, they exist in the hollow spaces, in the 5 empty beds that were never slept in again, in the unanswered questions that festered like wounds, and in the quiet, desperate hope that burned in the hearts of 2 parents long after their home had turned to ash. Our story takes place in the heart of West Virginia, in the small coal-dusted town of Fayetteville, a place where everyone knew everyone, and secrets, it was believed, couldn't last long. George Sodder was the embodiment of the American dream. An immigrant from Sardinia, Italy, he arrived in the United States in 1908, a boy of 13 with nothing to his name but a fierce work ethic. He built a successful trucking company from the ground up, transporting coal from the local mines. He was a proud, opinionated man, respected for his success, but also known for his vocal and often fiery criticisms of Benito Mussolini and the fascist government of his homeland. This outspokenness, in a town with a large and often divided Italian-American community, would later cast a long, dark shadow over his life. His wife, Jenny, was the heart of the home. A gentle, steadfast woman, she was the mother to their 10 children, John, the eldest, followed by Marion, George Jr., Maurice, Martha, Louis, Ginny Jr., Betty, Sylvia, and the youngest, Joe, who had gone to serve in the military during World War II. Their house, a large 2-story timber-framed building just 2 miles north of town, was always filled with the chaotic symphony of a large, loving family. It was a place of laughter, arguments, and the comforting aroma of Jenny's cooking. But in the months leading up to Christmas 1945, a series of strange, discordant notes began to disrupt their domestic harmony. It began with a stranger. A man appeared at their home one afternoon looking for work. George, always willing to help, gave him a few odd jobs, but the man was unsettling. He would stare at the back of the house, and on one occasion he pointed to the 2 fuse boxes on the rear wall. "This is going to cause a fire someday," he said. his voice flat, devoid of genuine concern. George thought it was an odd comment, but dismissed it. Not long after, another visitor arrived. This one was a life insurance salesman. After George politely but firmly declined his offer, the man's demeanor soured. "Your goddamn house is going up in smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed. You are going to be paid for the dirty remarks you have been making about Mussolini." The threat was so direct, so venomous, that it chilled George to the bone. He never forgot the face or the hatred burning in his eyes. The weeks crept closer to Christmas. The older Sodder boys, John and George Jr., noticed a strange car parked along the main highway for several days. Its occupants seemed to be watching the younger children as they walked home from school. The pieces were there, scattered and seemingly disconnected, but forming a mosaic of malice that the family would only recognize in hindsight. Christmas Eve, 1945. The war was over, and a spirit of celebration was in the air. Marion, the eldest daughter, had bought new toys for her younger siblings at the dime store where she worked, and the house was buzzing with excitement. The younger children, Maurice, age 14, Martha, 12, Louis, 9, Jenny, 8, and Betty, 5, begged their mother to let them stay up late to play with their new treasures. Jenny, tired from the day's preparations, agreed on the condition that they remember to feed the cows and close the chicken coop before they went to bed. She reminded the two oldest boys, John and George Jr., who were already dozing, of the chores. Then, with her husband George and their 2-year-old daughter Sylvia, she went upstairs to bed. At 12:30 a.m., the telephone rang, shattering the quiet of the house. Jenny stumbled downstairs to answer it. The voice on the other end was a woman she didn't know, asking for a name Jenny had never heard. There was a low, strange laugh in the background, the sound of clinking glasses, of a party somewhere far away. Jenny told the woman she had the wrong number and hung up. On her way back to bed, she noticed that the lights were still on and the front door was unlocked. The curtains were also open. She saw Marion sleeping on the living room couch and assumed the other children had gone up to the attic where their bedrooms were. She closed the curtains, turned off the lights, locked the door, and returned to her sleep, comforted by the thought of her children all safe under one roof. She awoke just a half hour later, at 1 a.m., to the smell of something thick and acrid, smoke. She opened her eyes to see that the room George used as his office was on fire, the flames greedily climbing the walls around the telephone line and the fuse box. "George, the house is on fire!" she screeched. They scrambled out of bed, grabbing little Sylvia. George yelled for the older boys, and he and Jenny and Sylvia and Marion and John and George Jr. all managed to escape the rapidly spreading inferno. They stood outside in the freezing night air, their bare feet stinging on the frozen ground, and stared up in horror at the attic windows where the other children were trapped. Panic set in, a cold, primal terror. George, a powerful man, shattered a window with his bare hands, slicing his arm open in the process, hoping to climb in. But the smoke and flames beat him back. He knew he needed the ladder, the heavy wooden ladder that he always kept propped against the side of the house. He ran to the spot where it always was. It was gone. The fire chief claimed the blaze had been hot enough to completely vaporize the bodies. but a local crematorium employee contacted the Sodders and told them that simply wasn't possible. Bones would have remained even after a 2-hour cremation at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The Sodder house fire had lasted less than an hour. Then, more strange discoveries came to light. A telephone repairman confirmed that the Sodders' phone line hadn't been burned through, as the fire department claimed. It had been cut deliberately. Someone had climbed 14 feet up the pole to do it. A bus driver who passed through Fayetteville late on Christmas Eve came forward. He swore he had seen people standing by the side of the road throwing what he called balls of fire at the Sodder house. Weeks later, Sylvia, the youngest daughter, found a small, hard, dark green rubber object in the yard near where the fire had started. George recognized it as a pineapple-type hand grenade, a firebomb. The pieces were no longer just scattered. They were forming a terrifying picture of a deliberate, malicious act. The children hadn't died in an accident. They had been taken. Driven by this horrifying conviction, George and Jenny Sodder dedicated the rest of their lives to finding their children. They pleaded with the local authorities and the FBI to reopen the case, but were met with resistance and indifference. The FBI declined to investigate, stating it was a local matter. So the Sodders took matters into their own hands. They hired a private investigator from Washington, D.C., a man named C.C. Tinsley. Tinsley unearthed a disturbing story. He learned that the insurance salesman who had threatened George was in fact a member of the coroner's jury that had deemed the fire accidental. He also discovered that the fireman, F.J. Morris, who claimed to have found no remains, had later confessed to a local minister that he had found something. He said he discovered a human heart in the ashes, which he had secretly buried in a metal box. He led George and Tinsley to the spot. They dug up the box. Inside was fresh beef liver, untouched by fire. It became horrifyingly clear to George that the story was a deliberate deception, perhaps designed to convince him to give up his search. It had the opposite effect. It was proof of a cover-up. Someone was trying to stop them looking. But why? In 1952, with their savings dwindling, but their resolve unbroken, George and Jenny Sodder erected a billboard on Route 16, the main road that cut through their town. It showed the smiling faces of their 5 lost children under a bold heading, $10,000 reward for information leading to the arrest and conviction of the person or persons guilty of the crime connected with their disappearance. It became a local landmark, a permanent, heartbreaking monument to a family's undying hope and an unsolved mystery. The billboard brought in a flood of tips and alleged sightings over the years. A woman who ran a tourist court in Charleston, West Virginia, claimed she saw the children in a car with 2 men and 2 women of Italian extraction the morning after the fire. A woman in St. Louis wrote to the Sodders, claiming that Martha was living in a convent there. When George tried to follow the lead, the Mother Superior denied it. There were sightings in Florida and Texas. Each lead was a spark of hope that was inevitably, cruelly extinguished, leaving the Sodders in an even deeper darkness. Years turned into decades. George and Jenny grew old, their faces etched with a grief that never lessened. The surviving children grew up and had families of their own, but the phantom presence of their lost siblings was a constant in their lives. The billboard remained, its colors fading under the West Virginia sun, a silent testament to a question that haunted an entire state. Then, in 1968, 23 years after the fire, a letter arrived. It was postmarked in Kentucky with no return address. Inside was a photograph. It was a picture of a young man in his mid to late 20s. He had dark curly hair, dark eyes, and a familiar, slightly asymmetrical face. George and Jenny stared at it, their hearts pounding in their chests. It was him. It was their Louis, all grown up. The resemblance was uncanny, undeniable. They turned the photo over. Scrawled on the back in shaky, unfamiliar handwriting was a cryptic, chilling message. Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie. Island Boys, A90132 or 35. The blood drained from Jenny's face. George, it's him. I know it is. My Louis. He returns to us. The message was baffling. Brother Frankie likely referred to their son Joe's middle name, which was Frank. But what did Ilil Boys mean? And the string of numbers at the end? Was it a zip code? A military serial number? A code? It felt like a ghost, a voice from the void, filled with meaning they couldn't quite grasp. You don't believe me, Jenny cried out to the world, to the authorities who had long since dismissed them. Now look, he was right there, and he remembers. They hired another private investigator and sent him to Kentucky to investigate the letter's origin. The detective took their money, went to Kentucky, and then vanished. He was never heard from again. It was another dead end, another slammed door, but this one felt different. The photograph was tangible proof. It was a sign that at least one of their children was alive out there, somewhere. It renewed their search with a desperate fervor, but it also deepened the mystery. Who sent it, and why? Was it a message of hope, or a cruel, calculated taunt? Was it from Louis himself, or from his captors? Why did you do this? Jenny would whisper at night, clutching the photograph. You ruined everything. George Sodder died in 1969, a year after the photograph arrived. He never stopped looking. He went to his grave believing his children were alive, stolen from him for his political opinions, for being an outsider who dared to succeed. Jenny continued the search, wearing black for the rest of her life, tending to the memorial garden she had planted on the site of their home. She passed away in 1989. After her death, the family finally took down the weathered, peeling billboard that had stood as a silent sentinel for over 35 years. The last surviving Sodder child, Sylvia, is now an old woman, and she still believes. She still waits. And here the story should end, a tragedy without a resolution, a mystery left to fade into local legend. But true darkness, once unleashed, rarely stays buried. In 2021, a young law student at West Virginia University was working on a thesis about famous state cold cases. Her project led her to the archives of the private investigator hired by the Sodders back in the 1950s, C.C. Tinsley. His firm had long since closed, and his files were donated to a university library. The student, named Clara, spent weeks poring over dusty boxes of Tinsley's old case files. Most of it was mundane: divorces, insurance fraud. But then she found it. A thin, unlabeled file tucked inside a larger one about a land dispute. Inside wasn't information about Tinsley's investigation for the Sodders. It was his investigation of the Sodders. The file contained meticulous notes on George Sodder's business dealings, his income, and most chillingly, transcripts of what appeared to be tapped phone conversations before the fire. There were receipts for payments made to Tinsley not from George Sodder, but from a prominent local official whose family had been business rivals of George's and who was known for his fierce pro-Mussolini stance. Tinsley hadn't been hired to find the children. He had been hired to control the search, to feed the family false hope, to lead them on wild goose chases, to make sure they never got too close to the truth. The story about the heart in the metal box, it was all there, planned out, a deliberate act of psychological torture. Clara felt a cold dread creep up her spine. She kept reading, her hand shaking. The last document in the file was a single typed page, a final report to his paymaster. Most of it was redacted with thick black ink, but at the bottom of the page, Tinsley had typed a single, chilling sentence. The 5 are assimilated. The biological father is no longer a concern. Their re-education proceeds as planned.